Here we go. Welcome to Adult Ed.
Okay, well, it's really great to see everybody. Starting a new year of Adult Ed. First of all, I want to mention all the work that's been done by the committee. So our chair, Gene Middlestat, and the other committee members have set up, I think, a really good series this year. You can find our brochure online. I noticed that there are a few brochures from last year out front, so don't get those. But you can, and you can also get. We'll have some paper copies to distribute later. So please be sure to check that out. And next week we'll have John Wilkinson, who is the Director of Ministry Engagement and Support for PCUSA, and he's going to be talking about the directions of the Presbyterian Church and also report on the last General Assembly. So it should be a very interesting program. And then for the rest of the year, we have many programs, social justice from agencies like WeShine. We have some theology. We have old favorites like John Patterson from Willamette University. So I think you'll find it's a pretty exciting series this year. So I'm going to leave this now to Kate Thompson to introduce our speaker.
Good morning. I was so excited when I heard through the Westminster grapevine, you'll be surprised to know there is one, that WeShine was considering leasing office space from Westminster. I struggled to contain myself and control my tongue. Finally, the relationship between Westminster and WeShine became official, and I could openly celebrate this marvelous match of missions. Then another opportunity arose when a speaking slot opened up for adult education. I immediately reached out to Jan, the executive director of WeShine, and she graciously added this presentation to her overly long list of things to do amid moving into the space here at Westminster. I first met Jan several summers ago with Chris Dela Cruz, our former associate pastor, who asked me if I was interested in coming along with him to meet some folks who were engaged in the development of building tiny villages as part of the solution to providing housing to those who were sleeping on the streets. I had no idea what I was getting into, as usual, but I was curious. As I recall, COVID distancing was still the norm. We met in your backyard, and you told us about your dream, your vision. You were just getting started. I was quite impressed with Jan's background in working to house those who had so few resources. I was impressed with her depth of understanding and what it would take to turn WeShine from vision to reality. It's one thing to have a vision. It's quite another to have the knowledge, the experience, the persistence to show up to meeting after meeting after meeting, to face setbacks, bureaucratic tangles, ignorance, hostility, and then get up the next day and do it all over again, with a smile on your face and a willingness to listen. Jan has done that and is here to tell you more about what WeShine has accomplished and her hopes for the future. Jan comes to this work with credentials, of course. She is a licensed social worker with a specialty in community services and social planning. She has worked as an aging and disability housing consultant, a bridge builder, forging coordination and cutting edge initiatives between aging and disability services and healthcare systems. She's worked as an adult protective services specialist, investigating allegations of neglect, abuse, and exploitation of seniors and adults with disabilities. She was operations manager of Providence Elder Place, a program of all-inclusive long-term care. Jan gave me 5 more pages of her past accomplishments, but I won't elaborate. I know you want to hear from her. Before Jan speaks, I'd like to give Carol Turner, a member of our congregation, who's been deeply involved in anti-poverty work, an opportunity to share with you the ways in which WeShine mission so beautifully aligns with the calling of Westminster. It's a joy to be able to partner with such capable leaders.
Good morning. I asked Kate if she would be so kind to let me just share a few things about the story to connect the dots between Westminster and Jan being here this morning, because it really illustrates, I think, how progress occurs, often behind the scenes. The first Sunday of January 2015, Greg Neal preached a sermon that moved several of us about what do we want Westminster to be. That began generation of some ideas about, what we were facing as a society, of the wealth inequity and all of those things. Ideas began to bubble. David Groff and I got together with social justice. We talked to Greg and Beth. Maybe just, what about just a forum on poverty? And yeah, they gave us our blessing, and we kind of went forward with the social justice committee and decided we wanted to also invite some local congregations to this forum. We began to meet with them. They liked the idea. We ended up having, in October 2015, a major forum with Donna Beagle, a nationally known speaker who lives here in Portland. And after that, the other congregations did not want to end meeting. So we continued to meet. We gradually formed the Interfaith Alliance on Poverty with the mission to really look at to help alleviate poverty in the Portland region and to really focus on systemic issues of poverty. So Westminster, luckily, has been our fiscal agent for that, kind of filing the papers related. We are not an official nonprofit. We've just done our stuff. If you haven't discovered us, yes, please look at the news in the Chimes, and we meet usually the first Thursday of every month. We focus on education and advocacy. Those are the two things we've done. And we'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary this coming year. I can't believe it. Anyway, but in about 2018 or 19, we had a study group with the Interfaith Alliance saying, okay, we see all these tents in Portland, and it's clearly growing. I think we need to kind of focus on this. And out of that, again, came, let's do a forum on this. And we were neighbors with Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods, another one of those people that you come. And we held a forum by Zoom at that point, because it was 2020 by the time we got, highlighting alternative villages in Seattle. And again, the idea just buried in it. And essentially the Interfaith Alliance, founded here at Westminster, birthed Shelter Now, which focuses on diverse actions for diverse needs. It's a nonprofit. And through Shelter Now, we have done a variety of things, and I speak we because Westminster still is involved. We ended up, I think Jan reached out to us, or I think you reached out to us about really that alternative villages were starting to pop up more and more, and should we look at this as maybe a network type thing. So for at least a year on Zoom, Jan and I and two other people talked about this network, and gradually it's grown. Got a big grant to write more, to learn more about it, and maybe Jan can speak about that, to really help form some support for alternative villages as part of the continuum of how we deal with homelessness. Anyway, for at least a year and a half, I had regular meetings by Zoom with Jan on that meeting, and it is only today that I first met her in person, and I'm just thrilled now that here we are hosting WeShine in this congregation. It's great.
Sorry, I hurt my foot over the weekend and I'm limping worse than usual. Sorry about that. Hello, everybody. I think folks wanted me to talk a little bit about how WeShine got started before I go into our overview of what we're doing. And you also see a video that are the voices of some of our villagers and our board members and other supporters. But to start, to kind of feed into the story Carol just told, picture 2021. We're a year into COVID. The world is still pretty shut down. The camping problem all over Portland is pretty extreme. Neighbors in many neighborhoods are extremely upset. I lived I live still in the Laurelhurst neighborhood, and we had campers in our Laurelhurst Park that were very, very, very upsetting to many of the neighbors, and for many good reasons, with needles everywhere and human waste and strange behavior, violent, frightening behavior at times. And so at the time, I had retired officially from a county job and was working as a consultant for Cascadia Behavioral Health. And I had, in retirement, decided to get active in my neighborhood, so I've been sitting on my neighborhood association board for a couple of years. And it's just a scene where a lot of things are percolating around, all this negativity from the neighbors towards the campers, the shutdown, the fact that at Cascadia, where I was consulting with them on how to bring more services into their housing, I was watching people come into apartments directly from the streets and blow out at a very high level because they were not prepared to be successful tenants in housing. Their needs hadn't been met, they hadn't been addressed before they moved in, and there was no way to make them address them after they moved in. I was also really concerned about the negativity and hostility that neighbors were expressing, although I understand perfectly the upset that they were feeling about the kinds of things some of the folks were doing that were camping and causing fear and upset among the neighbors. And it seemed to me that neighborhoods were also doing a lot of finger pointing at the city and most of the city, although it's actually the county they probably should have been pointing their fingers at. But anyway, they were doing a lot of finger pointing because they passed measures to help pay for services and weren't seeing enough things change. And it sort of solve this problem. But people weren't really looking at what our responsibility as neighbors and citizens is to being part of the solution. I felt, not enough anyway. So I was being a neighborhood activist. I started talking to other neighborhood activists and talking about, actually some of the folks involved in Shelter Now had written some papers about the role of neighborhoods in helping to address the issues of homelessness. So you put that all together and talking to people and started looking at, well, what could neighborhoods do? And with a group of activists from Sullivan's Gulch, Kearns, and Laurelhurst, and to some extent the Sunnyside neighborhood, we got together and started talking about what is the neighborhood role to help with homelessness. And cooked up a vision of neighborhood-based micro-villages using kind of excess land or parking lots that were being underutilized, with the idea of engaging neighbors with the villages and engaging the villagers with the neighbors and trying to build a different kind of relationship, giving neighbors something to be for instead of against, and a way to greet campers and folks that are unhoused with what I'm trying to say, hospitality rather than hostility. And we also, in those early days, did a lot of research, talking to Seattle, talking to Los Angeles, San Francisco, and some East Coast areas too, about some of the alternative shelters that have been set up in other parts of the country, and looking at what works, what do people who have been camping want in a shelter, and came up with some key provisions that we wanted to incorporate in our vision, including a certain level of autonomy or self-governance for the villagers, so they have a voice in the place where they're living. Also, to be sure that we were offering a form of shelter that offered privacy and a locked front door and windows and some personal private outdoor space that would allow couples and pets and would be welcoming and safe for people who often do not feel welcome or safe in a lot of the more traditional congregate shelters, or even the very, very large villages that have been set up in Portland and other cities. So that was the impetus for us forming the other neighborhood activists that I was working with, and I formed a board and incorporated in May of 2021. And so to talk about timing, so we incorporated in May. We began searching for properties immediately and approached at least 50 landowners in our own core neighborhoods. Got nowhere fast. But we also applied to become a vendor through the County Joint Office of Homeless Services. and formed a board, enlarged our board. And by November, we were already going outside our core neighborhoods to find other land. And we were able to connect to the Parkrose Community United Church of Christ, which had a very, very long history of homeless services and social justice work. And we're already contemplating putting some tiny houses on their property. And they were very, very glad to partner with a nonprofit to offer a shelter rather than trying to take on operating shelter themselves. So by February, we had a lease. By January, we had already been approved as a vendor by the county. We started building at the Zidell Boathouse Yard in February and March of 22. And we had an architect who had designed pods for us, and it was a modular design, so we were building off-site with the idea of bringing the pods to Parkrose Community Church of Christ once they were built or they were ready to assemble. We started bringing the completed modules to the property by May, and we opened in August of 2022. So we've now been operating a little over 2 years there. So if any of you have ever worked for nonprofits or government, probably a lot of you have, that's lightning fast. That's about as fast as you've ever heard of anybody doing something like that. So we feel proud about that. So I'm going to turn to our PowerPoint now and talk a little bit, it'll spell out more about our vision and how we operate, what our villages look like. So part of the impetus for us forming was the idea that we felt that private and public sectors must work together to address the problem of homelessness and give neighbors something to be for, as I mentioned. And one of the things we really wanted to do is bridge the gap between their survival in inhumane conditions on the street and getting access to housing. And any of you have studied the problem, you know that the biggest reason we have homelessness is because of the lack of available affordable housing. So even if people want to get off the streets and into housing, often accessing that housing is extremely difficult. There just isn't enough affordable housing available still. And it takes a very, very long time to develop affordable housing. And I used to do that, so I know how long it takes. I built a number of buildings in my past history. It would take 4 to 5 years to assemble the financing and packaging and everything else you needed to actually make housing affordable. So our vision is to build and operate small-scale, neighborhood-based villages that have built-in support services to link our villagers or guests to all kinds of social, health, and housing services, to have community support from neighbors and community volunteers and church hosts that are wrapped around each village, and to focus on serving some of the most underserved segments of the unhoused population. And when we're talking about that, PSU's studies from the Homeless Research Action Collaborative have shown that the majority of inhabitants of all of our shelter resources in Portland are single white males. And so the populations that tend to not feel welcome or safe or fall through the cracks in those settings include women and female identified, people who identify as LGBTQIA+, Black, Indigenous people of color, people with disabilities, seniors. I could go on and on. There are a lot of subsets that would not feel welcome or safe in these large congregate settings with a majority single white male population. Let's see. So we think microvillages make sense because they feel safer and can offer a more personalized level of service. Pretty hard to fall through the cracks when there's only 10 or 15 people in a microvillage. They can fit almost anywhere. There's really hardly a neighborhood in Portland that couldn't find a parking lot, underutilized parking lot, or piece of undeveloped land that could be used for a microvillage. And it would allow us to have a fair share approach of spreading the load of helping folks who are unhoused throughout Portland and not concentrating them in small pockets, which has been a real problem for some parts of the city, as you all know. Although neighbors fight us and can be hostile to us when we first propose them to come into a neighborhood, they're less so than they would be towards larger developments. In fact, in 2 cases where our second and third villages have gone in or are in process, We're very near a much larger temporary access shelter with 150 people. And so once that starts to develop, neighbors go, oh, you've got 10? No problem. So that's been helpful to us. Let's see. That's a schematic of our Parkrose Village, our first village, showing the community buildings. It actually took us a year after we opened the village to get our shared community spaces up. We've learned from that, and now at our second and third villages, all the community facilities are going up at the same time as the pods. So we won't have this gap between having to use porta potties and, shower services instead of having our own facilities on site. There it goes. Oh, that went backwards, didn't it? Let's see. Oh, sorry, I'll get control of this one of these days. Well now, what am I doing? I keep going the wrong way. Wow, what did I do?
Turn this one forward.
Shoot. Let's see if I can.
Here, I'll start.
I'll try to not go past it. I think we're on
Next one.
this one.
There you go.
Okay, so what is a WeShine micro village? It's 10 to 20 sleeping pods located on leased private or public property that provide heat, air conditioning, light, and electric outlets in each pod, or we call them sleeping pods. So they're not really tiny houses because they do not have any kitchen or bathroom facilities. They're just sleeping spaces that are private. But we do have shared hygiene and sanitation facilities and shared spaces for cooking, laundry, and meetings, and fencing for privacy and security. It's really important to us that our villages be located in the heart of neighborhoods on or near public transit and close to a diverse array of commercial, social, retail, health services. And this is a sketch of our first village at Parkrose. We're the little blue rectangle on the lower left side. That church has a 2-acre campus that is chock full of other social justice initiatives and climate initiatives, and you name it, they've got to go in there. But it's a beautiful location for our first village, right on Halsey, if you know where the Bi-Mart is. And so very close to an incredible array of job opportunities and social services and health services, and has worked very well for our villagers. There. Okay, we're gonna go to our video here at this time. And just, if you're looking at the sign, this is something we put up at our second village about accepting applications. And we did open in the last month, and we're basically full and serving people who identify as female with priority for Black, Indigenous, and people of color there.
You can all start praying that this works.
This is a video we made about a year ago, and it features our Parkrose site, because at the time, that was the only one that was up and running, and villagers from there. By the way, we've had 8 graduates from that village. We call a person a graduate when they leave on a planned basis and move into a stable, affordable housing. We don't like to use the term permanent because nothing much is permanent.
What's the average length of stay?
9 to 12 months.
It's pretty terrifying when you're out there. You're just in a constant state of kind of fear, and you just don't know who you can trust. About 6 months ago now, I found WeShine, and it's been, amazing ever since that.
It's not an exaggeration to say that being able to come here saved my life.
No, I'll fix it in a second.
It's pretty terrifying when you're out there. You're just in a constant state of kind of fear, and you just don't know who you can trust. About 6 months ago now, I found WeShine, and it's been, amazing ever since that.
It's not an exaggeration to say that being able to come here saved my life.
WeShine builds and operates microvillages to serve some of the most underserved portions of the unhoused population in the Portland area.
WeShine is unique.
This is kind of micro villages, but they're community based.
We wanted to build on the best practices of pioneers who've gone before us to come up with a model of service that we thought would work well in Portland.
It's a model that has been shown to work all over the country as far as getting people permanently moved into affordable housing.
I work with a lot of people who live unsheltered and they say, I want a place where I can be safe.
Having a pod here in WeShine allowed me to begin focusing on everything else.
A lot of research talks about people having, broken networks, broken connections, and part of the healing process is how can they get reconnected with a sense of family and community.
WeShine just really cares, I think, to get the best possible outcome for us, so we can get to where we need to be by the time we leave.
I am much better today than I was several years ago, for sure. Actually thinking that, hey, maybe happiness is possible.
It's pretty bad out there for everybody right now, and I don't know what the right answer is, and I don't know that anybody does, but what I do know is that it takes people like Jan and WeShine to even start getting to that right answer. As far as Portland goes, we need more people like that are willing to just do something, just do something different than maybe anybody's done before.
5 words you pronounce wrong. 2 years before your brain starts shutting down. Dementia is now known as type 3 diabetes, according to the Mayo Clinic, where doctors have made a shocking discovery that changes everything we know about memory loss and mental decline. So if you or a loved one is often forgetting things or suffering with brain fog, after 3,400 brain scans and years of clinical research, an award-winning brain health expert has just revealed the real root cause of memory loss and dementia. It has nothing.
I'm sure you appreciate it.
Thanks for the reminder.
How many of us get that ad on YouTube? There we go. Okay, but I cannot screw up the advancing here. Okay, so there's more to WeShine Village that we haven't really talked about yet. We really try to focus on building that sense of community, and gardening and art are two of the most non-threatening, universally accepted ways that we can do that in our villages. So we partner with a nonprofit called Gather Make Shelter that exclusively focuses on bringing art projects or self-expression and gardening opportunities to shelters. So we are committed to creating gardening spaces and shaded outdoor areas in all of our villages, personal front porches or patios. And then we also provide 3 layers of service. There's the services that our own staff provides. There's the services that volunteers help enrich our programs with. And then we do have partnerships with other agencies that provide specialized or culturally specific services or a higher level of professional skill than we offer through our own staffing. Our admissions are low barrier, which means we do no criminal checks. We do allow people who are actively using drugs or alcohol to live in our villages. We accept couples, we accept pets. We are the first shelter in Portland to offer cat owners patios for their cats, because we were turning away a lot of people with cats in the first year because our pods are so small. It's hard to imagine somebody living in a pod with 1 or 2 cats. They're such tiny spaces, but we felt we put our thinking caps on and thought about, well, if we can provide them with catios, we can make it possible for people with cats to move into a shelter. And so a catio is a screened porch for a cat that you put behind the pod where they can come out the window and right into the screened porch area. And the cats can go out and sit in the sun like they like to do, and, chortle at the birds and all the things they like to do. So it's allowed us to serve people who are cat owners. Let's see, supported self-governance model of operations. So one of the things, we require a few things of our villagers when they move in. One is they have to sign a good guest agreement, which is really sort of a code of conduct about being a good guest in our village. And it has all the kind of things you might expect, like, no violence and,
treat people with courtesy and respect, and, no, we don't allow via the fire marshal any kind of candles or cooking or any kind of devices that would heat up inside the pods except for electric blankets. We do provide heat, of course, so they are warm, and they can plug in radios and charge their phones and things, but they can't make coffee in their pods or put a toaster in or anything like that. So we have the code of conduct they sign, and then we require them, it's mandatory to attend a weekly village council meeting. And the village council is really the heart of the village. It's where, sticky issues get discussed. The village is a democratic process. Villagers vote on issues. They have a say in the policies of the village. So for things like whether there's a curfew or not, and what time the curfew is, and how they're going to divide up the chores to help keep the village clean and safe, and whether they want to have days when they can invite the community into the village to see where they're living. So these are all decisions the villagers make. And it's not a pure democracy because I'm a benevolent dictator. And if they were to make a decision that was, not safe or against the law or something, we would come in and say, sorry, that one won't go. But that's never happened. So the village council meets weekly. We try to have volunteers bring a hot home-cooked meal to those meetings, and we've had great luck with churches and other volunteers signing up to do that, because that's a real, again, a community building piece. So we're gonna make you come to a meeting, but we're gonna feed you really well. And that helps make sure our attendance at the village council meetings is really good. And a few times a year, we try to have an event where we invite the cooks to come in for a meal with the villagers, and the villagers serve the cooks. And that's been a really nice piece of community engagement. Let's see, villagers also have a voice we have a policy advisory committee, a village advisory committee, and we actually, everything that's in our village handbook has been reviewed and discussed by villagers. So they've had a very strong role in the handbook that we put together for villagers. They also advise us on safety issues, and we have a safety committee at each village, and we define safety really broadly, so it's everything from vermin to trip and fall hazards to handling severe weather, everything to do with safety that they have a voice in. And this is one of our accessible pods at our second village, Avalon, which is opened, and you can see it's a little bit different looking pod than the ones you saw in the video for Parkrose. That's because we're trying to get better with each iteration of our villages. So this was actually built by a company called Old Hickory, and it's what they call a playhouse, but we adapted it to become a sleeping pod. And the ADA ones don't have the front porch. I mean, they're on a deck because it's accessible, but I don't think I have a picture in here, but all the other pods that aren't on the accessible deck have a beautiful, large front porch. So. Come on, there. This is the front gate, the front fence of Avalon, and the beautiful artwork you see on that fence is part of the Gather, Make, Shelter work with our villagers. So the art design was designed by folks who are unhoused, and we've had several painting days. The whole village is full of this kind of artwork. It's a garden theme. We have a daisy lane. The inside fence has plant figures painted over almost 100% of the fence. There's still one more painting day needed. And the front design, this is the front fence design. Now that villagers have moved in, they'll be engaged in the finish work on it. So there's still some painting to do. Plus they're going to end up putting kind of three-dimensional figures like birds and bees and flowers and things throughout on top of the painted art. So that would be an opportunity for the villagers to get involved. Just in terms of our opening village there, I mentioned it's for people who identify as female. So we have 7 individuals who identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color. We have 5 people who have disabilities, and we have 3 people who identify as trans in the village. So that shows that our commitment to diversity is working, and that we're able to bring in the people who are from some of the most underserved groups. So we have similar statistics at our Parkrose Village. This is some of my board members. and our architect marking St. Andrew's parking lot for where the pods are gonna go. So just to show you that one, this one's gonna serve older adults, age 45 or more, and adults with physical disabilities, and we will be prioritizing Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And the model, you can see in the background, those are some of the pods that we'll be putting at, here at St. Andrews, and they're a little bit different design than Avalon. These were built by a nonprofit called Portland Shed that approached me about a year ago and said they'd like to build tiny pods for us, and he'd build the first one free, and then if I liked it, he'd do all the rest for just the cost of materials. And so I loved what he did. He built it to basically design that we specified to try to keep improving our design on the pods. And he's working on pods number 9 and 10 now, but we expect to be moving them over to the parking lot in a couple of weeks, as soon as the electrical lines are in. And meanwhile, at St. Andrews, they've offered us most of their undercroft for our community spaces, so that their basement. So they have a large community room, a beautiful full kitchen, which the city wouldn't allow us to put if we were trying to put a kitchen in the village. The city would not allow us to put a full kitchen with stoves and ovens. We are renovating the space down there, so the church will have a lift that we went together, and they're paying about half the cost of the lift, and we're paying the other half, and that will not only serve the villagers at WeShine, but it will allow congregants who haven't been able to come to church because they couldn't get to the bathroom to come back to church. So we're putting in a lift, ADA accessible shower, and there will be 3 ADA accessible toilets. In fact, the whole facility is very, very ADA accessible, which is why we're choosing to serve older adults and people with physical disabilities at this village. So we expect this one will open early 2025. Let's see. So what services do we offer? Volunteer opportunities such as teaching, working on village improvement projects, and providing home-cooked meals. We do community engagement for our villagers by encouraging them to participate and helping them get to community activities that are recreational or educational. They've had a lot of interest in things like attending the annual memorial for people who have died from living unhoused, or going to AIDS awareness activities, or to AA and NA groups, you name it. There's a wide variety of cultural, social, and service kinds of activities that villagers like to do. And then I've mentioned our village council already. So people often ask me whenever I speak to public audience, it's all about why are you low barrier? Why do you allow people to use alcohol and drugs? And basically being low barrier is a best practice, both nationally and in Oregon. And research has shown that you have a higher rate of success of getting people out of shelter and successfully housed and staying in housing, remaining there, if you don't give them any barriers when you first encounter them. You meet them where they are, you accept them immediately into shelter. It's a shelter first, it's like housing first, with no barriers. Meet them where they are, let them have some time to heal and move at their own pace to accept treatment or to decide how they want to use drugs and alcohol for the rest of their lives. We do put rules around their use. They aren't allowed to use in public, and we don't allow any cooking of drugs inside the pods, but we don't police what they do inside the pods unless we see evidence they've been cooking drugs inside. So actually, we've had very low percentage of villagers who are actively using drugs or alcohol. Most have already started their treatment programs or are in recovery before they come to us. But we generally have 1 or 2 people in each village who are struggling with those issues. We don't do criminal checks, we mentioned, so we are at adult-only villages. We don't allow children in the villages, but we don't inquire into their past history. We give them a chance to start fresh on a clean slate when they move to the village. And we also use a harm reduction model, so we have a lot of Naxalone and Narcan and clean needles and fentanyl testing strips and things like that around our villages to try to prevent overdose deaths. We have peers on our staff who are themselves have lived experience of recovery from drug addiction or mental health issues or both. And they're there to walk side by side with people on a journey towards healing. And while we're one of the worst states in the nation in terms of resources for treatment, it's very, very difficult to get treatment in Portland, in Oregon. But with the peers on staff, we're able to walk side by side with people. And one thing that has improved in the last few years is access to medication-assisted treatment. And that has really helped to turn things around to a great extent. And that is a very good pathway for people as they start the healing journey to first use medication and then participate in outpatient treatment. And that's been a very successful approach for many people, not just our villagers. And what do we do when guests violate the rules? Well, we hold them accountable. You know, they have to abide by the good guest agreement. So they don't have tenant rights. They're not tenants in an apartment. They're shelter users. So if we have to exit them quickly, we can, and we have. But generally, we try to work with them, give them warnings, try to find out what's going on with them in their lives, try to work with them, and encourage incremental improvements. And our rate of exiting people has slowed down dramatically since we've been operating for 2 years. We were doing a lot more exiting at first. Now, very rare do we exit. And most often, if they're going to exit, they exit themselves because they realize that it's just not the right time or the right fit for them. Other common questions: how are property owners protected? We provide liability insurance for our hosts that we're renting space from. We put them on as a named insured. And in fact, vandalism and property problems have been extremely reduced by our presence on the property. At Parkrose United Church of Christ, they had a terrible problem with constant vandalism and constant campers coming on and causing problems, starting fires, doing things like that. Our presence alone has slowed that down, and then it was so helpful that the church decided to hire WeShine and our villagers to provide sexton services for the church. So we now have a contract with the church, and 2 of our villagers act as sextons. And the way they define that role is that they patrol the grounds, the entire 2-acre grounds, twice a day, every day, 7 days a week. And the church pays us a small amount for that, and we pay the villagers. And the villagers themselves deal with the campers. And so our approach to campers is that we offer them food and water, but tell them they can't camp. And the church itself offers a meal program, a lunch program, and a shower service. Well, the lunch is 3 times a week, and the shower and haircuts and pet services and nursing students all come on Wednesdays. It's Wellness Wednesdays. So that method has worked extremely well, and the property problems are just not really an issue anymore at that property. So similar things at Avalon have improved already, which is the one on Division. So how do we work with neighbors? We try to develop a good neighbor agreement in every area where we go. And often we're dealing with an angry or hostile group of neighbors initially. But the greatest amount of hostility we faced was at our first village at Parkrose. There we had a lot of threats against the villagers and the staff. We had members of the public behaving in really violent and scary ways. We had a Bi-Mart next door put a petition at every single counter and had 1,000 people sign saying they didn't want the village there. One of our plucky volunteers wrote an editorial to the Oregonian, which I framed, that said, there are 31,000 people in this neighborhood and only 1,000 signed that petition. I love that. But a lot of that's all been mitigated. Just our presence over time. We've had several neighbors coming to me saying, if you ever need a neighbor from Parkrose to talk to another neighborhood and tell them not to worry, we'll be glad to do that. And in fact, they went to North Portland to one of our first meetings with the neighborhood there around St. Andrews to say, it's not going to be what you think. It's good. It's been a benefit to our neighborhood. So really appreciate it when neighbors are willing to do that kind of thing. Let's see. So who pays for our services? The Joint Office of Homeless Services covers most of our costs to both develop and operate the villages. However, they do not cover all of our administrative costs to run a nonprofit and to do things like coordinate volunteers and keep your books and have an audit and pay rent for an office structure. So we have to raise money to cover that gap. And we do that by seeking grants and donations and in-kind support. We got our first grant. You know, young nonprofits sometimes have trouble getting grants from foundations, but we were able to get our first significant grants this year from the Oregon Community Foundation and the Hillman Foundation. And we're now going to be part of the Give Guide this fall with the Willamette League, which we're extremely excited about. So things are improving. I gotta finish, right?
No.
Nope.
Is the joint office county?
It is a county, yeah, but the city, it's called joint because the city and the county work together. They have a contract and a plan together on how to work together to affect homelessness. And the city contributes a large amount of money to the joint office. So, but there's been some disagreement between the city and county over, you know, whether the city's getting its fair share out of the work that the joint office is doing. So here's our board. We do try to have our board be very diverse, and we also try to hire staff that are representative of the people we're serving. So this is our current board of directors. They have incredible backgrounds. They're a dream team, the board of directors, and they're still a very hardworking board because we're so understaffed because of the lack of money for administrative costs that board members end up being unpaid staff members some of the time, and we're hoping that will change over time. And we'd like to grow our board this year. If you know anybody, who would be good. So this is more of the artwork at Avalon. And here's a slide where I'm just sort of recognizing some of the partners who have worked with us at our various villages, have offered us pro bono services in many cases, or deeply discounted services. We couldn't do it without them. And that's Daisy Lane you're looking at there at Avalon. So, and those are our community buildings that the volunteers are standing in front of. You can help. We have a website. You can donate to us directly. There's our catio, our first catio.
No, really?
There it is. So we, you know, if you know anybody who might have a good lot to consider developing a microvillage in another neighborhood where we want to grow, we intend to grow a whole network of villages over time. And we would like to see the local government put more funding towards microvillages. So far, the government's been a little bit reluctant to support us because they want to do much bigger things and, you know, solve the problem faster. What we argue is that there are people who are always going to fall through the cracks, who need a more personal level of service, and for whom a small village works much better than a big one. And I think we have made some convincing arguments that way, but still, joint office is putting, you know, only a fraction of money towards this kind of alternative shelter. And we have roles for volunteers, and I do a volunteer orientation every month if anybody would be interested in volunteering at one of our villages. And that's it. I'm open to questions. I talked a long time. Sorry about that.
Plenty of time.
Yeah.
How long do people stay usually?
Our average so far is 9 to 12 months.
This is a transition, a stepping stone. How difficult it is to find, you didn't say permanent housing, but more long-lasting housing for your clients when they're ready to move on?
Well, we're doing pretty good at it. We actually have a housing specialist on our staff now, half-time, and that's really made a difference to have someone who's really just focused on that and really on top of all the buildings opening up and sort of shared housing opportunities and SRO housing opportunities and other things. So she looks at a broad array of housing options, and often it's very reassuring to our villagers to find out that they don't have to come up with $1,200, $1,400 a month, that we can find them places to live that are more on the $400 to $800 a month level. Most of our villagers do work, at least part-time, and so they are bringing in an income and can pay some rent. They just can't pay market rates. So I'd say it's pretty optimistic about the housing connections.
So when you say that you're focusing on, in one of the villages, people of color or people with disabilities or Black or Indigenous or whatever, how do you must get a larger number of people applying than the ones you select, and how do you go through that?
Right, well, that's a great question. Well, we basically have a vulnerability scale. We assess everybody who applies to us, and we give them priority or extra points on the scale if they are Black, Indigenous, people of color, or if they're female identified, or if they're fleeing domestic violence, or if they have disabilities, or if they're camping in the nearby area. Because we also want to recognize that we're trying to help the neighborhood address its local problem of campers. So those are the things we give them extra points for, and so we admit people based on who has the highest points, not when they applied.
Do you have staff at the villages around the clock, or how do you?
Not around the clock, but we do have staff there 7 days a week, 8 hours a day. And we try to have 2 people on duty at all times, so. And we have an on-call system for nighttime emergencies, and there's 2 layers of on-call. There's a primary and a secondary. And, but in the 2 years we've been operating, we've only had to deal with crises maybe 4 or 5 times. So, these are adults, and they're relatively self-sufficient, and, they manage to get through a night without us.
You mentioned, at least this is what I understood, that Portland has relatively less treatment options for people than other places. Is there like an obvious reason why that's the case?
I don't know, Oregon has just underinvested in mental health, behavioral health resources for decades. And I don't know why, it kept being not prioritized, but that's the result of decades and decades of indifference and neglect.
So I mean, it sounds like state level funding is
Yeah,
relatively
state level
less.
funding. It's at the state level that most of the neglect and indifference has happened.
Do most of the residents have phones?
Yes, they all have phones, or we make sure they do within the first few weeks of their being in the village. So when they move in, often they need IDs, they're food insecure, they haven't seen a doctor in who knows when, they haven't seen a dentist in decades, they may not have glasses, they aren't on the Oregon Health Plan. So the first things we do with people is address these sort of basic needs. We do have the kitchenette where they can cook, and we get everybody on SNAP benefits so they can cook, and we help them connect to food boxes, and we keep a kind of a community food shelf going in the village too. So it's only when they've sort of addressed these basic needs that they can begin to turn their attention to wanting a therapist, getting a dental visit, getting some new glasses, seeing specialists if they've had chronic conditions that have been neglected or untreated. So, and it's only after they've done that that they can begin to look at earning an income or applying for disability benefits. So you can see why it might take 2 years to get on the path so you could actually be in a place to succeed once you left the village.
What's the annual cost for managing?
It's about $500,000 a year per village at the size that we are right now, which is 10-person, but all 3 of our villages right now are 10-person villages. Yes, ma'am. I see it back there.
Oh, how do they find you? I mean, how do people, or how are they able to access?
Yeah, one of our staff tasks is to get to know the neighborhood and do a lot of visiting around to other community organizations that might be referral sources for our villages. And so we've done that in the case of every village, try to build relationships before we even open with other community organizations. And then people can apply on their own, they can self-apply, or they can come through an agency. So it's either way, we always have applications available at our gates. People walk by and pick up an application. But most of them come through online, on the web, at a website. And we try to advertise that pretty widely. So filling up hasn't been a problem.
So how long is your waiting list?
We try to cap it at 20 or 30, because we don't want people to be sitting on waiting lists that they'll never be offered a chance to get into the shelter. So we cap it.
So you mentioned that they have access to internet and phones and all that. Do they pay for their own services, or is that covered by the cost of the village?
Well, we pay for the internet for them, and we help them get phones, but if there's a charge on the phone, they pay for it. Yeah.
Jane?
Yes.
2 questions. One, as you look at sites, I know generally, what do you do about sewage and electrical well, do you require those?
The city requires those.
The city
The
requires
city
those.
requires that, and that actually raises the cost of building a village about $100,000.
I would think so.
And it's supposed to be temporary, just so you know. But, yeah, so they do require us to put in sewer lines and electrical, and that's part of fire prevention too, by having electrical services. But it's the sewer that costs us a lot of money. And I do hope, and it was part of our original vision, that we would try to do some alternatives to traditional toilets. But and that's really a thing you have to do through DEQ. So, and we haven't really been in a place where we could pursue that yet, but I'm hoping in the future we'll get some sort of waiver from DEQ and be able to offer either composting toilets or incinerating toilets and avoid putting in sewers or even septic tanks, but something to avoid having to put in the very expensive sewer facilities in what's considered a temporary structure. Yeah.
And then a second question, with your funding coming primarily through the joint office, I mean, that ultimately is HUD funding, a lot of it, I assume, is HUD funding, federal dollars, that essentially, as I understand, requires that you're always transitioning people to stable housing.
That's true that we're always required to transition. Right now, the primary source of the funds is the supportive housing services bond that voters passed in the metro area. But that, right now, it runs out in '27, I believe, but they're looking at extending it. But there was a lot of COVID dollars, but that mostly went to the city shelters, the Safe Rest Villages and the temporary access shelters. And now they're all transitioning to supportive housing services because that money's gone away.
Right.
And the city can't afford to operate the shelters they set up, so that's a transition.
But is that a stated goal that that people are transitioning to stable housing?
Yes, we have performance measurements, and basically we're supposed to reach at least 45% turnover rate a year to stable, affordable housing, and we're supposed to keep our beds full 90% of the time and all that.
And did you set up those performance measures, or they're set up by the county?
The joint office set them
joint
up, but we
office.
had to agree to them. I mean, we could argue if we wanted to.
Okay.
How can Westminster best partner with you?
Well, I'd love to see Westminster getting some volunteers engaged, if you'd like. Right now, our Parkrose Village is feeling a little neglected because the new kids on the block are getting all the attention. So we'd love to have some more volunteers to help with our Parkrose Village, which is at 122nd and Halsey, Northeast Halsey. So there's opportunities to get involved in the meal programs at the villages. We are often working on improvement projects at our villages to just enhance the environment. Like we built covered pergolas at Avalon and Parkrose this summer, so they would have a permanent rain cover and shade cover year-round at both villages. And we got some grant money to do that, but there are opportunities to do improvement projects, whether it's building new garden beds, or at Parkrose we had to rebuild all the floors and all our pods. So there's building projects that could be happening almost all the time. Also, we would love to have volunteers who have skills from their background, whether it's in master gardening or psychology or social work or counseling or drug treatment or job seeking skills, who might want to do some training or educating with villagers. These are all opportunities we could custom build depending on people's backgrounds. Remember, we're only 10 people at a time though, so everything we do is sort of small scale. So what we don't want to have is being deluged with big donations of things that without talking to people. So.
Well, Janet, this has really been an inspiring talk. I think your solution is one that is a real solution as opposed to a lot of not so real solutions that we've heard. So I want to thank you. And before we thank Janet, I just want to remind you or tell you that the ever resourceful Linda Dinan has paper copies of our brochure.
Lindsay brought them.
Oh, okay, Lindsay brought them. So you can get a brochure that will have the rest of our fall program. So Janet, again, thank you so much. This has really been a great program.